edition of Abu Dhabi Sustainability Week Web Series. My name is Zainab Ali, Head of Outreach and Stakeholder Relations at Masdar, and I'm happy to be your moderator today. Environmental, social, and governance, which is also known as ESG, is a 21st century business success story. With customers, employees, business partners, and investors all showing increasing interest in an organization's ESG performance, being able to show that they have an ESG strategy in place is fast becoming critical to business. However, while developing an ESG strategy may be seen as essential, many companies are finding that putting one in place is still a challenge. For companies that do manage to deliver an ESG strategy, the financial benefit may not be immediately apparent. Abu Dhabi Sustainability Week has partnered with Harvard Business Review to conduct survey-led research to understand how businesses are implementing ESG strategies. I'd like to welcome Alex Clemente, Founding Managing Director of Harvard Business Review Analytic Services, to discuss the outcomes of the research. Welcome, Alex.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Alex, if you can tell us what the purpose of this research is.
Sure. First, I'd like to thank Masdar for sponsoring this body of research. And so to answer your question, you could say that the purpose of this research is actually purpose. When you talk about the purpose of a business enterprise, the main goal is profit. But many senior managers and organizations around the world and their boards of directors are waking up to the notion of providing positive returns, not only for shareholders, but also for society and the environment, and being able to manage it and have that greater sense of purpose.
That's really interesting. So why it's only happening now, Alex?
That's a great question. First off, I'd like to say that it's really not a new concept. So personally, in my travels, I once visited Taj Hotel's corporate office in Mumbai. And on the wall in their reception area was the following statement: in a free enterprise, the community is not just another stakeholder in business, but it is in fact the very purpose of its existence. And this statement was made by Jamsetji Tata, the founder of their parent, the Tata Group, way back in the 19th century. So in essence, without a community to serve, there really is no business. And it's possible that in the era of shareholder value, which was really the mantra of many organizations, particularly the latter part of the 20th century, many corporations perhaps lost sight of that. And they lost sight of how their people, their products, and their services impact their communities that they serve, as well as the environments within which that they exist. But all of that considered, there's been some pretty major external events, particularly back in 2020. We had the Me Too movement, we had the Black Lives Matter, and also equal pay, these major social movements that are spurring greater awareness of gender and racial inequities and biases in businesses and communities that they serve. So there's also been a pretty strong alarm bell for anyone that's been willing to listen of the grave consequences of climate change. So in short, the world has problems that do need to be solved. And we can't expect governments to manage it all by themselves just through social programs and regulation, because their reach and their resources are not unlimited.
Interesting. So the world has problems that must be solved. And in your opinion, what does this research tell us?
Well, the report examines how identifying tangible performance metrics combined with dedicated leadership, actionable frameworks, and training the right talent can help organizations execute an ESG plan that not only delivers long-term value, but also prepares them for future business success.
And what are some of the key findings that you can share with us today, Alex, and with the audience as well?
Yeah, happy to. But first, maybe what I should do is preface some of those results with some transparency on the methodology. This study was conducted in late 2021. So it's very recent, and had roughly 250 respondents or organizations representing, and a majority of which these respondents were senior and executive level management in the HBR global reader audience. About a third of the respondents, a little more than a third, were from North America. Slightly more than a quarter were based in Europe. 1/5 or thereabouts were in the Asia Pacific region, and 6% from the Middle East and Africa. It was a broad industry study with the largest industries being represented: manufacturing, financial services, technology, business and consulting services, and actually government, education, and not-for-profit cluster was also one of the major industries. And now maybe what I could do is share some of the general highlights, starting with 83% of respondents said that their organizations were increasing their budget for ESG during the next 12 months. So that was a very encouraging result. And 41% say that they expect to see a return on their ESG investments after 2 years' time. But 1/3 of organizations in this study really said that they were only just beginning to formulate or execute a formal ESG plan.
Wow, only 1/3. So why do you think that organizations are only now getting started?
Well, what we saw in this study is that more than 80% of the organizations responding are investing in ESG initiatives, but the HBR audience tends to be a little more ahead of the curve than the average company. So just to be, fair and transparent about that, and in order for more organizations to embrace an ESG strategy and put it into practice, they need to demonstrate a business case for it. And, what's going to be the material impact that ESG can have on the business. They also have to know how they're going to get around the challenges and the barriers to adopting and executing an ESG strategy.
That's very interesting to hear today. And if that's so, what are some of the benefits that can support a business case, or what are the benefits that could be demonstrated today?
I mean, that's a great question. And actually, based on our research, the intended benefits that these organizations tell us that they're seeking include an enhanced brand and reputation, improved impact on society, greater investment from investors, increased employee engagement, regulatory readiness, improved talent retention, customer growth, reduced cost, and increased efficiency. So you can see there's many, many benefits that can be tied to and accomplished with a great ESG strategy.
Then, and from your point of view, Alex, how are organizations working towards these goals?
Well, yeah, so they identified 3 things where they say that they're actually meeting their goals, and these were increasing their employee engagement. We see this not only in our own study, but that employees do get switched on when they know what they're doing is actually having a really positive impact in the world. Other things were regulatory readiness. So kind of getting, it is somewhat human nature that without regulation, things won't happen, but we know that governments are kind of tightening the rules on sustainability and things like that, pay equity and among other things. So having that regulatory readiness and then improve costs and efficiencies. If you're a manufacturer, for example, the way that you can reduce the cost of your inputs and also the byproducts that perhaps were contributing to waste can now be turned into other products. So, and then the other goals that they mentioned weren't, I think, too far away. But one was this notion of the improved impact on society. And to be fair, I think that's a much harder thing to measure than some of those other things.
That's very interesting. Then, talking about measuring, in your opinion, how are organizations measuring those goals and benefits of the ESG strategy?
Yeah, well, I mean, again, from our research, the one thing that a majority of organizations say that they're tracking are these specific ESG metrics. And these can include diversity, compensation equity, reduction in material costs, carbon emissions capture, things of that nature. To a lesser extent, brand equity through sentiment analysis and media coverage, improved regulatory compliance, which can include things like the mean time to discover and resolve issues, environmental issues, and compliance expenses, things like that. Then some organizations look at independent third-party metrics, and actually 13%. I wanted to provide this hard number because I think this is really critical, and that's 13% in the study are tracking their enhanced financial performance that's achieved by their ESG program. And hopefully that number should grow as organizations get better equipped with managing ESG. The last one is maybe a negative, and that's tracking capital investments, which may mean taking a hit in the short term, but that's obviously being done for a better long-term benefit.
So then, Alex, does the study cover some of the challenges organizations face with the ESG strategy? And if so, from your point of view, what are the biggest ones or like the biggest barriers for organizations to come when it comes to the ESG strategy?
Well, yeah, it's not a simple thing, right? It is a very complex idea and concept that you now have to turn into a strategy. And with that, there's always a lot of obstacles and barriers and challenges and things that organizations can easily point to. And specifically measuring and tracking the performance was the number one challenge that organizations or the respondents identified. And truth be told, only 9% of the respondent organizations here can actually report the return on investment from their ESG strategy and initiative. So it does demonstrate the difficulty with it. But again, we like that other data point, this number should grow. And as I mentioned, 40%, earlier I mentioned 40% of organizations expect to be able to see the return on investment from their ESG strategy and activities after about 2 years' time. Next, making an ESG framework actionable was cited by virtually the same number of people. ESG initiatives have to be clearly communicated so that everybody in the organization knows how what they do impacts the overall outcome. One thing I'd like to add is organizations are now considered big ecosystems. So working with lots of partners and suppliers and vendors. And really, they need to think about that whole ecosystem and which partners they work with and so forth to make sure that their goals, for example, if we talk about supply chain, you're only as green as your supply chain and your vendors and so forth. So it can go beyond just the walls of the organization. And then back to what with the top challenge, identifying clear key performance indicators is something that's really important. You need to start with the goal of what you want to accomplish. Let's say that reducing greenhouse gases is the goal. Then measuring carbon reduction and containment, would be a good KPI. If it's pay equity, then a full compensation audit and an analysis would certainly be required for that. Next up, qualifying ROI of ESG efforts. And that's probably the most challenging thing to prove, but you can draw a connection to the bottom line. For example, if you say a circular economy is your goal, which, we used to talk about cradle to grave. We now talk about cradle to cradle. How can products be recycled, old products be recycled back into new products, and how you measure that in the reduction of cost and materials, led by recycling products and ingredients. You can pretty clearly draw a line to that as an example. The fifth biggest challenge was restructuring the organizations to build ESG into the brand and the value proposition. This is going to be another requirement that leaders need to think through. Other barriers identified were things around executing on change management. We know that people don't like change, so that has to be considered and have a plan for it. Generating useful insights from ESG data. That data needs to not only be tracked, but it also has to be shared and be visible to everybody that needs to know it, to be able to know how they're performing. Also, they mentioned acquiring talent with ESG experience and expertise. And I would like to point out that it's not just about finding external people, but it's also about training the existing workforce that you have, because as we've seen in many studies, how switched on workers get when they know that what they're doing is actually contributing to a greater good, not just a corporate profit. And then getting executive buy-in and partnering with ESG advisors and consultants, being able to have your leaders really take charge, but also then finding partners that can give you the right advice on how you should be doing ESG. So these are all things that are part of the equation, and unfortunately, they are challenges that will have to be tackled before you can start to see the benefits of your ESG program.
So, as I understand that the top challenge it could be mentioned is the return of investment. Did you gather any other data on measuring returns from the ESG as well?
Yeah, and to recap, 41% of the respondents say that they expect to have a return on investment within, or I should say after 2 years' time. 19% say that between 1 to 2 years, they will see an ROI, and 4% say within 1 year. So if we add up all of those numbers, you get to about 2/3 of this audience that basically are saying right now they can't measure it exactly, but I'll throw in the world, at least not yet. They believe that it won't be long before they can. But also, again, there's 9% stating that they have already achieved financial benefits from ESG. And, quite frankly, that's how trends begin. A small minority, so in this case, 9% of organizations can take up a leadership position, and others kind of catch sight, the followers then follow. And I think what's really important, that those numbers that show perhaps movement, but not quite kind of getting to the goal. I think it's important to note that only 8% of respondents say that they don't expect to realize these financial benefits, and only 6% say that they don't know when they will.
Well, that's really very encouraging. I think, as you mentioned, everything starts small and they go big. And that leads us to our last question of the day, Alex. Are these any calls to actions or specific recommendation and given in the report you would like to share with the audience today?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for this opportunity. We always try to provide a prescriptive approach in our reports to help leaders really undertake these kinds of change management exercises. The first is to set a set of goals, and then how the business can actually benefit, but also how society and the environment is benefiting as well. And then set a number of metrics to track whether you are succeeding or not succeeding. So, for example, if carbon reduction, whether it's carbon reduction perhaps, or recycling products and materials, or pay equity and other enhancements of labor type relations, you can't really manage any of those things unless you can measure it. Next is to consider how you can connect the financial dots. So you might have like these cold, hard ESG numbers, but it's not enough just to have the ESG metrics. It's being able to link ESG metrics to financial metrics, which is the key. So we would recommend making goals and metrics for the organization also as transparent and visible as possible so that everyone knows what's happening and how you're performing. This serves not just managers and workers, but also customers, when you think about it, stakeholders, and also the investors today that are calling on businesses to be more green, be more equitable, be more sustainable, be more societally responsible. And it's not enough just to reduce carbon, for example. If you don't have a diverse workforce or you're not paying people equitable, then you don't have a full ESG strategy in place. Also, to appoint strong and dedicated leadership, definitely at the top of the organization, but also throughout the organizations. Employers should have, if they don't already, a chief sustainability officer. There should also be some type of center for excellence, but also to have roles throughout the organization. Also, like if you think of a matrix format, on the front lines, for example, as well as kind of in the middle of the organization, having people that are ESG champions really throughout the organization. And actually what our research did identify is that for about a third of companies, they said that their CEO was the number one person responsible for the success of their ESG programs. And that's a fantastic thing. But also a significant number, about a fifth, said that having a dedicated cross-functional ESG team was also, how they were doing it. And to that end, establishing the right chain of command. As I mentioned, having a chief sustainability officer, who does that individual report to? What's actually something that we recommend is having the chief sustainability officer connected with the chief financial officer. So that there it can either be a direct reporting line or some kind of a well-defined CFO, CSO, or it could be the CFO and the CDO, this chief diversity officer, for example. If they have that type of relationship, then they can really kind of get at making that connection of ESG goals to financial goals and financial performance. And then, as we saw, investing in the right talent is something that organizations need. Some of the people in the study seem to say that, only an ESG savvy team can meld corporate goals with ethical values and practices. And again, it doesn't mean that you have to find people outside the organization. It also means you can create an initiative to train people in your organization and kind of make that change happen. Lastly, you have to prepare for the future. For organizations that haven't figured it out, one thing I can say is that you no longer have to choose between strong financial returns and a positive impact on the environment, because sustainability and social value can actually be a new source of innovation and a source of competitive advantage. And probably the last thing I'd like to leave you all with today is, besides this report, there are some excellent articles published that were written by Harvard Business School professor Michael Porter. One is called Creating Shared Value. The other is the Shared Value Ecosystem, and these are available on hbr.org. Also, the current issue of Harvard Business Review actually features 4 articles in what we call our bi-monthly spotlight. And these articles, are all about sustainability and purpose. And there's one in there from Professor Ranjay Gulati, who's also with the Harvard Business School. And I would encourage anybody in the audience today who wants to lead change in their organizations to read these articles. They're great resources along with this report that can help you get started, or it can actually help improve an existing ESG program. And finally, you can access HBR in English with our global edition, but you can also access it in Arabic through our local edition published there in Abu Dhabi. So I'd like to say thanks again to Masdar for sponsoring this research and also for making the webinar possible today. And thanks to all of you for tuning in, and Zainab for being a wonderful host and moderator today. Thank you.
You're most welcome, and thank you very much, Alex. It's been great talking to you today, hearing from you the great ESG strategies and what they can do to benefit the community and also towards a very sustainable future. And I'd like also to thank our audience for attending today. To review the report, please visit www.adsw.ae. We look forward to having you join us again for the next edition of Abu Dhabi Sustainability Week Web Series. And until then, please stay safe and goodbye.